Hey guys, welcome to Film Darkly. I'm your host Anthony Paceno, and it has been over a month since I did one of these podcasts. Um, I think almost every time I do one, I say I'm gonna start being more reliable, and then I never am. So I'm gonna stop saying it. Things just get really hectic and heavy and working, a 9 to 5 job, and then every time you get off work, you basically have to work on something else. Just gets really, really bothersome. I do like the fact that I can do everything I do from home, but it does get very, it starts to weigh on you, because I get off work and then I gotta, make a teaser, trailer, edit a film, edit another film, and I even just filmed a project and I haven't even felt motivated enough to start editing it. Instead, I've been writing something because I'm really feeling the desire to write it. But I mean, it's just been really, really busy for me lately, so I just have not been able to get to this podcast like I usually try to, and so I've had to, I've been taking a break from it in a way I never really wanted to, but that's the situation, and so what are you gonna do? So I wanted to review this film I had watched a while back called The Lodge. And this was a 2020 film. It was supposed to release, or it did release, about a week, maybe before quarantine hit, maybe a little before that. I just remember I was getting ready to go see it. It was getting ready to hit the theaters, and COVID hit. And I was, all theaters shut down immediately, and I was just unable to get around to seeing this film. So I actually looked it up online and went ahead and watched it online to check it out for the first time, because it was really being kind of pushed as this like really awesome horror flick. And, it's supposed to be, extremely scary, like Hereditary. Kind of has an aesthetic similar to Hereditary. And so I finally took the time to go ahead and watch it. So The Lodge, which on IMDb it's a 2019 film, but it was released this year. And it's directed by Severine Fiala and Veronica Franz. On IMDb, it says it's an Italian film, so it doesn't seem like an Italian film, but maybe it was just made in Italy, or that could be some other connection, maybe to Italy in some way, because it's very much an American film. It doesn't feel like an Italian film in the slightest. The movie stars Riley Keough, I think is how you say her name, as Grace, Jaden Martell as Aiden Hall, Leah McHugh as Mia Hall, and Richard Armitage as Richard Hall. And I believe it's Jaden who is it the person? Yeah. So Jaden Martell, you may remember him as soon as you watch this movie from It. He plays the little kid Bill, the stutterer. That's who he is in this film, and he does a pretty good job. Him and his Leah McHugh, who plays his younger sister. So the film actually starts out with like this family picture, and the family's basically going through hard times, and it looks like a divorce has just occurred, and the mother is played by Alicia Silverstone. And essentially what ends up happening is the dad takes the family, the kids, and their new, who will become their stepmom, played by Riley Keough, Grace, to a lodge. They go up in the snow to this lodge, and the dad ends up having to get called away. I don't quite remember. It's been a while since I watched this, but I believe he gets called away because he's involved in, I think he's involved in medical or something like that, but he gets called away for work purposes. So he has to actually leave the family for a few days. And things get kind of weird. First, all the food disappears, everything disappears in the house, and this lady who's essentially the stepmother to both Mia and Aiden is trying to kind of get on their good side, but they're making it very difficult. So it's like a typical family piece in that sense that you're sort of following this family and you're seeing how they're trying to cope with having a stepmother, and they don't know how. And Grace is this really kind-hearted young lady who was actually, and this just reminded me of what the dad does, Richard. He's a psychologist, and so he has to go back because of some work duty, and I don't remember what that is. But he essentially, one of his patients was Grace. And so Grace has this interesting background where it sounds as if she was really abused by a fundamentalist family who had a cult. And that's kind of where her upbringing comes from. And so she's a very different individual and doesn't know how to feel about certain things and has interesting ways of dealing with things. And without really getting into the film, obviously, I'm being as ambiguous as I possibly can be. Because the movie kind of, it starts out with a bang, and it's a very slow burn film after that. And it builds to something pretty horrifying and pretty crazy. And I think, so I've seen some reviews of this movie highly praising it, and I've seen some, and I know that there's quite a few that don't praise it so highly. Its Metascore is 64, and even its audience score on IMDb is 6.0 out of 10. So it's not rated the best, and I could kind of see why. For one, general audiences are still kind of picking up on the whole slow burn thing. Usually slow burn films are not always that popular with general audiences. Audiences want movies to move really fast, even their horrors. Hence why the Conjuring universe has kind of gone into this whole jump scare every 2 minutes type scenario. And a lot of really big production mainstream horror films tend to be jump scare galore, because it's sort of what people want. They just kind of want to keep getting jump scared. But what we're seeing in the horror genre right now is this real pull that cinephiles are making to see more smart, slow burn horrors. Horrors that don't rely on the jump scares, but terrify you by the scenario, which is real horror, honestly. I mean, that's the kind of horror that sticks with you. The jump scares don't stick with you. What sticks with you is creating the atmosphere. A movie like Hereditary, that sticks to you after you watch that film. A movie like The Witch, it sticks to you. And the movie and The Lodge is another film that tries to do the same thing. This is kind of in the vein of the film It Comes at Night, if you've seen that. I felt like It Comes at Night was sort of a slow burn. It's a slow burn horror, but it kind of felt almost like the same with The Lodge, where it's like a wannabe. It tries really hard to be a slow burn horror. But what you find is instead the movie just chooses to move very, very slowly as opposed to building. Hereditary doesn't have very many jump scares at all. But the movie, as it slow burns, it builds, and the intensity grows until you get to that really crazy ending, and you're ready for it in a way. Like, you've been brought into it, and it terrifies you, and it's crazy, and you're like, what did I remember walking in the theater saying to myself, what did I just watch? Because this was just insane. The Witch is kind of the same way. This slow burn film, slow burn until you get to Black Phillip, and Black Phillip finally talks, and you're just like, what? It blows your mind. So slow burn films have to have a way of building tension the entire time it's burning. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And you can always just sort of have like decent elements here and there. So like a perfect example would be like It Follows. It Follows is great as a slow burn horror. It really kind of flows well. It continues to keep the tension. Its only real issue is it has a weak third act. That's its only real issue. But other than that, the film is really good, and some people don't like it as much, but I think it's a really great film in how it moves itself along. And back in the day, back in the 60s, 70s, a lot of horror films were like this. Movies like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist and The Omen were slow burn horrors where things just sort of happened along the way and kept building and building and building until it became this very erratic third act. But you were ready for that erratic third act. You were ready for the craziness. You were ready for the fallout. You're like, okay, here I am. So, does The Lodge do this? A movie like It Comes at Night doesn't do it as well as it should. It wasn't a very memorable film for me, which is one of the reasons I never reviewed it. Although I'm reviewing it now. But The Lodge, it's a film that is a slow burn, but there were too many moments where I felt like turning it off. And that's the biggest problem with the movie. There were just too many moments where I felt like, okay, this feels like it's going nowhere. And in the end, everything sort of pays off, and it has a really creepy, good third act. But that second act just doesn't carry very well. The first act is great, starts with a bang, it goes very well. Then that second act, though, just sort of lingers. And it lingers for a long time where the mystery of the film is just sort of lost. And you don't feel like it's going anywhere. And suddenly it just gets to this third act. And you're now, for me, I even got lost in the story. Where I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand why characters were angry. I had no idea. And I even had to rewind it a few times. Trying to figure out what was it that I was missing. And some stuff was just so subtle. And I think I just had I wasn't as invested, that it just gets to the point where you're just sort of, it's slow burning for no reason. And now you get to this finale where everything goes really crazy, and you're trying to remember the events of the second act to make that third act meaningful. And that's an issue. It's an issue when a film can't really hook you and bring you along for the ride. And I think that was my biggest problem with this movie, was that it never really felt like it hooked me and brought me along for the ride. I just sort of, kind of watched it, and that was it. And then it got to this crazy, interesting ending, and I was like, well, that's a good ending, but that's about all it was. And I just recognized that, it wasn't as good of a film as I would like it to have been. And, there are people who really enjoyed it. Like I said, there are video essays out there about this film talking about how good it is. I just didn't, I never got invested like I should have been invested. Like the movie should have made me invested. I will say that Riley Keough, I think is how you say her last name. I will say that she did a great job in this film. I really, really liked her throughout. I thought her acting was very good. I didn't think anything too special of the kids or even the dad. The dad's hardly in the film, though. But, to me, they were just sort of there. Alicia Silverstone actually, does a pretty good job for her part. And, but in the end, I just felt like Riley's the only reason this movie gets anywhere. And I felt like she's the only reason this movie's any good, really. because she manages to really play her part well, especially when it gets to that third act. So I mean, is it a recommend? It's hard to say. I seriously think it's a movie a lot of people could skip, but I do think it's kind of worth the watch for the ending. And that's what's confusing about it for me, is it just, if it didn't have this really abysmal second act, that third act would really pay off, and I would say sit down and watch this movie. It's almost like if that second act was any better, this movie would be up there for me with some of the best horror films I've ever seen, especially because the ending is just so unsettling. But because that second act is just not good, the ending doesn't feel like a good payoff. It just feels like a really good act. Like, it almost feels like a good movie in and of itself, in a way. And it kind of makes you wonder, like, well, how do you have a good third act without having a good build to it? And I don't know how to say it except to say that it's such a twist at the end, and it provides you with enough information at the end that second act almost doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter because it doesn't provide you with all the info you need to make a strong third act. That third act is strong because of something you learn that is mentioned in the first act. And there's only a few things that happen in the second act that make you see why this woman is reverting the way she's reverting, or what's happening to her psychologically. But when you find out these little tiny nitpicky things, like I'm sitting here giving you a brief summarization of this film, and even in my brief summarization, I've given you enough to know what happens. And I think that's the simplicity of this movie. It's too simple. It's too easy. It needed to be more of a slow burn that was active. A very active slow burn. And it doesn't feel like an active slow burn. Instead, it just sort of feels like a slow burn that's a slow burn for the sake of being a slow burn. And it just sort of like one of the characters is like, loses it. And that's it. And I don't know. It's a letdown of a film. When it was done, I felt like it was a 6 out of 10. I felt like it was like, I like that ending and I want to like this movie, but there's just something about this film I don't like, and I can't quite grasp that. So in the end, that's what I'm going to say about The Lodge. I'll go ahead and pick it up. No, I'll leave it at the 6 out of 10. I actually think that's very deserving for it to be a 6 out of 10. I for once agree with the audience rating on The Lodge for IMDb, even though IMDb's rating system is like, you could kind of make 1,000 screen names and keep voting for the same movie. So really, if somebody had the time and want really the desire, they could make that movie into like an 8 out of 10 without having actually been different people watching the movie and actually rating it. That's the unfortunate thing about that system, which is one of the reasons why people who really bank on those systems are kind of hilarious to me, because it's like, audience ratings don't mean anything, to be honest. So anyways, go ahead and go see or check out The Lodge. Like I said, if slow burns aren't your thing, though, you probably don't want to watch this at all, because it's just not going to satisfy you. I think, though, if you're a horror head, if you're somebody who really loves horror films, I would say check it out, because even though it has that lame second act, you might feel a little different about it than I do, and you might actually enjoy it. I think if that second act works for you, you're going to not pick this movie up to like an 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. That's honestly how much this movie gets better when it gets that third act. It's the fact that second act, that whole middle chunk of the film doesn't work for me, is the only reason this film gets a lower rating for me. And so that's it. I would say, though, give it give it a watch if you like those slow burn horrors, because it's at least worth the watch for the ending. So, anyways, thanks for listening, guys. Hopefully I'll get back to you soon. Hopefully don't get too busy. There are a few other movies I would like to talk about, and so I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.